Today we are talking about tantrums, meltdowns, and panic attacks.
And people on social media love to confuse them, purposely, I think. Everything is labeled a panic attack. Why? Maybe because a meltdown or a tantrum is viewed as a bad behavior. But really, it's quite simple. A tantrum communicates, I want it, but I can't have it. A meltdown communicates, it's all too much and I can't handle it. And a panic attack communicates, I'm scared and I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Knowing the difference is really helpful when we're in the trenches because we can respond appropriately because the way you respond to those three things is very different and you use different de-escalation techniques, but they're all really big feelings.
Yes.
So
they need to be addressed, as you said. And again, what's causing them helps you learn positive coping mechanisms for dealing with them and handling those big feelings. So what do we do to avoid de-escalating? When do we let a meltdown just play out? On and on and on. That's why we're doing this episode.
Yeah, and it's good to think about these things now because when you're in the moment, you're really just reacting. You're not thinking it through. So it's good to kind of have an idea of what each of these are and what the best way to deal with each of these is. So meltdowns, tantrums, panic attacks, they all look different, but they also can look similar. So
particularly in a young child that only has so much form of self-expression, so much language, they do look similar, but they are different.
Yeah. So the similarities, there's biting, shaking, yelling, all the things that you see when you've got, a kid sprawled out on the floor at Target.
Yes.
That could be a tantrum or a meltdown.
And a tantrum, a panic attack, meltdown, they could all happen at the same time.
Or one can move to the other.
Yes.
And there are warning signs for all of these.
Yes.
So kids often are tense. They're the tensed muscles. They've got flushed cheeks. You can see when one's coming on. It's very rare that you don't have some warning.
Right, absolutely. And again, it comes down to limited communication skills for a young child, and tantruming is a natural phenomenon. It is a developmentally appropriate phenomenon, the terrible twos. But for autistic people, it can last longer as the ability to communicate is strung out a little bit more. And it's important to remember that even if your child has languages developing on schedule, their communication might not be developing on schedule. Communication at a deeper level, this is what I'm feeling, those big feelings that lead to not understanding why you can't have what you want in this moment, or fatigue, hunger that you can't quite communicate, complex emotions about what's going on in the day.
Yeah. So when they're having a tantrum, the best thing to do is just kind of ignore that, right? Isn't that like kind of best practices? If someone's having a tantrum,
stay neutral.
Yeah.
It's to stay neutral. Ignore it if you can. Redirect. The primary line of defense for a tantrum is to redirect to something different. The success is generally pretty good on a tantrum unless they're really dug in, right?
Right. But I feel like in the tantrum mode, like let's say you're at Target. We've all been there. We're in line. They see Pokemon cards. They see candy. They see something. That's usually like, I want it. I can't have it.
Yes.
They start whining. The tantrum starts.
Yes.
You see it. And then that's when you still have a window of opportunity to redirect.
Yes. But then sometimes it with so much stimuli in Target, can't decide between a piece of candy and a toy, and the lights are bright and there's a lot of people and sounds and noise, and we might go into a meltdown phase. We've all been at Target when we couldn't make a decision on which toy we wanted, and it has led from I want it, I can't have it, to this is all just way too much for me, right?
Yeah, or there's an expectation there on the child's behalf that you don't have, that, it's in his brain, that they should have that. And that's where it moves into maybe the meltdown phase.
Yes.
So before it gets to the meltdown phase, or if it is just a tantrum, the goal there, and when you're working with your kid with a tantrum, is to get them to recognize that triggering situation for, you and your child, and to communicate better.
Communicate better, offer choices, give time to process the choices, and, sometimes let the tantrum play out, right? Because they might move on naturally if you just have a neutral face and a neutral body and give them time to pick between a toy and a piece of candy.
Yeah.
So panic attacks are different. And one of the reasons why I'm such a stickler on social media when a child says, or when a parent comments that their child is having a panic attack, is it's very specific. It's in the name, panic, a synonym for fear. And what is driving that fear in a child is, again, very specific to their life. If your child is experiencing true panic attacks, you definitely need professional help to get to the bottom of what is causing that fear. Yeah. To label it a panic attack takes away the opportunity to communicate, develop better communication skills with your child. And again, the neurology of a panic attack is much different.
I feel like the phrase, like you saying panic attack, is kind of become part of the vernacular, like saying like, oh, I'm so OCD because I like my desk to be organized. I feel like people are saying like, oh, I'm having a panic attack when they just mean like they're anxious.
Yes.
So I feel like it's been diluted a little bit.
Yes.
And I think people are overusing panic attack when it really isn't truly a panic attack. A panic attack, I've had them. I don't know if you've had one, but like it is very physiological. I mean, the breathing, the crying, all of those things.
Yes.
It is overwhelming, and it's not just like freaking out.
Well, and admittingly with a child, sometimes it's hard to tell because they get beet red and sometimes they hold their breath and all of these things that might mimic a panic attack. But it's important to remember that if it is a true panic attack, there's a fear that's driving it, and you get to the bottom. That's the root of, are they scared that they're not going to get the toy? What's going to happen? There's still a root fear there that you need to address. Without fear as the root, it's a communication issue.
Right. And there's a lot more in our refrigerator paper, our version of the white paper on our website that really goes into the neurology that defines and differentiates each one of these, the tantrum, the meltdown, and the panic attack.
So tantrums happen across developmental, right?
Yes.
So you can have a childhood tantrum, a teen can have a tantrum, an adult often has a tantrum.
But starting with childhood tantrums, the terrible twos, although I feel like the threes were pretty terrible with tantrums.
Fair.
Well, and certainly I'm thinking about some epic tantrums. Actually, I'm thinking some meltdowns. Tantrums kind of went across the childhood board.
Yeah.
And that's, again, a lot of that is because your child is small, their communication is not developed.
Well, I will tell you that in our house, we had extreme communication differences. My kids are only 17 months apart.
Yeah.
My son obviously was not talking or communicating at all. Again, communication developments, you point, you scream for something. He wasn't doing any of that. He was climbing on the furniture to get what he wanted. My daughter was the opposite. Her language was advanced. And the real life comparison of their tantrums was shocking because she could say what she wanted very clearly, very young, and it makes a difference, right?
Yeah. In our house, a lot of those tantrums would be a lot of frustration. Yeah. So my two kids, my boys, are 21 months apart. And developmentally, I did feel like they were similar in age. My oldest was a little delayed. My youngest one, a little precocious. So I felt like sometimes I was parenting twins.
Yeah.
But, and they were both boys. They both liked to play with similar things. And I think it was, in some ways kind of a power move on my younger one's part, where he would sometimes be very, he would say maybe a lot. So my oldest one would say, well, do you want to play this? And my younger one would be like, well, maybe. And my older one, who is autistic, the gray area of maybe does not work well. No. So often he would get incredibly frustrated with his younger brother because he would always waffle and say, well, maybe I'll do that, maybe blah, blah, blah. And then, or he would quit playing or something like that. And the frustration, so that was a trigger that always led to a tantrum. So we were always negotiating those for sure. But yes, we were all familiar with the childhood tantrum. And what about the teen tantrum?
Oh, those are brutal. Right? even when you have a nonverbal child who can throw a teenage tantrum is brutal, right? And in our house, my daughter was like the tongue was a
master?
sword,
Ah.
right? And so the biting, clap back, which didn't get her way, and it's developmentally appropriate,
Right.
And again, the first line of defense is neutrality,
Right.
Is
Right. Don't engage.
don't engage, don't fight with your kids, and that's tough, right? Like,
Yeah.
these are the two choices. This is the curfew.
Yeah.
You cannot go, but if you won't go, and you'll be home at curfew, right?
And what about the adult? Do you have any tantrums?
I mean, I know to stitch and bitch a bit. Sometimes my big thing is I talk to myself and I mutter and I get very animated, and my husband will often say, "What is the problem?" Right? But it's me just having a little mini tantrum under my breath.
Yeah. Venting is my go-to when I am going to throw a tantrum.
Yeah.
And it depends who I vent to. Like, usually I throw a little tantrum if I have some pet peeves. One of them is if I have plans with friends, it's set, I'm excited about it, and then someone will say, "Oh, I've invited so and so." I don't want to be with that so and so, and then I'm like, "Ah!" So I definitely need to vent to somebody probably in that same group. Like, ugh, now the plans changed.
Or to your husband, who remains neutral.
Yes, unless it is your husband who's causing you to tantrum.
Oh, wow.
So the other day, I have this pet peeve, and my husband will use the word aspirin to mean everything. Like, aspirin means acetaminophen or ibuprofen, and I don't know why. Like, it totally bugs me. And he did it again to mean Advil. And I have corrected him in the past, but I threw a little tantrum about it, and I'm just like, why can you not use the proper word,
vernacular?
And so I do have a friend who I immediately texted and said, like, this is a real problem in my marriage.
I'd say you're doing all right. That's your real problem. But meltdowns are much more serious and much harder to redirect or vent to a friend about, no matter your age. And particularly for autism, the autistic meltdown is awful. It's awful for everyone, the child especially. I remember distinctly you calling and telling me about your Sunday, Bloody Sunday meltdown at Easter.
Yes. I should have known. I'm going to say this. I knew the trigger. The trigger was going somewhere where he had to be contained. It was Easter Sunday Mass, the Super Bowl of masses. So tons of people. So we went, the family, the four of us went. My oldest was just livid, really, from the get-go. Like, didn't even want to get in the car. That should have been the signal. Like, to me, that it should have, but for some reason, I'm like, we're going to do this. It's going to work out. It's going to be fine.
30 years of Catholicism.
Yeah,
Telling you that you have to go to Easter Mass.
Exactly. So we go there, and my very kind Jewish husband took, our youngest son in and stayed the whole time in Mass while I grappled literally with our oldest son, who was screaming top of his lungs at everyone who was going inside, saying, "Hey, lady in the hat, I hate you." And, it was really a glorious Easter. And no one gave us the time of day. I mean, some really dirty looks.
Well, it is Easter Sunday.
It's Easter Sunday. It's just nice to be really charitable and Christian on that day.
Or Jewish, apparently.
Yes. Yeah. And so, no, it was brutal. And the takeaway wasn't to me that, my son needed to go to Mass more, or like we used to do that. It was, this is a big trigger. It's overwhelming for him. Yes. The noises, the people, the sitting still, all of those things. It was way too much. Yes. The sensory overload, the expectations, the out of routine. Yes. If it had been something very important to us that, we wanted him to attend Mass every Sunday, we should have done that in a much different way. Yeah. We should have done incremental. Yeah, 5 minutes had a plan. Yeah. Maybe consult with an ABA therapist and have, and make that happen. Right. But it was just a recipe for disaster. And it was not his fault. That meltdown was all on me.
Well, it usually is, right? I mean, I remember my son vividly having a meltdown on Christmas Day Christmas, holidays hard anyway, the
Yep.
presents, the smells, the family,
The
and
routine.
the routine. And for some reason, I insisted that we get a picture. Well, I had matching T-shirts, and I wanted him to get a picture. And he was snapped even before I kept insisting on it. And, he turned around and slapped somebody. And thankfully, it was a cousin his cousins, show him so much grace and kindness. But it was awful for him. That behavior was awful for him, and I should have let it go and not done. So now that was a lesson in how to approach the holidays, as you had a lesson in how to approach church.
Yeah.
You have to learn from these things or they're going to happen again.
Right. And these meltdowns, they're giving us good information.
Absolutely.
They're giving us good information about behaviors and triggers and needs and communication and all of these things. So, looking at those meltdowns, which are really what we're talking about mostly, it's like the meltdowns where they are really unable to control themselves. And that's when you think, okay, this is behavior I need to look at.
Yeah.
What are the antecedents? Do I need to is this something we need to talk about in our behavior plan with the therapist, with the teacher? These are the things to look out for. Maybe it's medication that helps them, buy them a little time before they get to the meltdown.
Yeah.
But this is really where you're getting a lot of good information about how they are able to cope and not cope.
And we have other episodes where we talk specifically about ABA. We talk about those modalities of therapy that help you break down behavior and analyze behavior. And then we talk about some people who are distinctly opposed to those type of therapies. But what I really want to get across is one of the benefits of you having your child enrolled in a therapy that's ongoing is the ability to go postpartum and break out.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you still, I would say that I didn't have perspective on some of the worst meltdowns until I had talked to somebody other than my immediate family that wasn't there. And they started asking me questions that I hadn't even thought of. You're in it. You're sort of in the storm and you don't always see things. And so families that choose to do all of the therapy themselves, to homeschool, that's a lot of pressure. So I always encourage you to have an objective resource. And, social media groups are great, but they don't know you. They don't know your family. They don't know your situation. So there's no substitute for somebody in your home.
And also just trying to avoid the meltdown isn't the way to do it either. Just to say, okay, we're never going to go to church again, or we're never going to go to Target because there's just too much, that's going to perhaps encourage a meltdown. Like those aren't the answers if those things are important to you, which,
going to Target or going to the grocery store is an important life skill, right? So you have to, you're going to have to dive in there.
Right. So just avoiding all triggers isn't really a reasonable approach.
Or possible.
Right. So we also talk a little bit more about why autistic neurology directly leads to struggling with the stimulatory overload in our paper. And we found that understanding helped us be more empathetic to what our kids were going through, and we highly recommend reading that. Also, about panic attacks, I know we're not talking too much about panic attacks, but there is no developmental purpose to a panic attack, which we've talked about with tantrums and meltdowns, that there is some. So it's really fear-based, and again, you've got to go talk to a medical professional if your child's having a panic attack.
Yeah, it's really some sort of a fear that is driving the behavior, maybe warranted, maybe some sort of trauma, and though that information can take you a while to dig out of a very small child. So again, panic attacks, but again, professional help.
Yes, and it's very good to know the difference.
Yes.
This episode of Refrigerator Moms is brought to you by Brain Performance Technologies. Brain Performance Technologies is a specialty mental health clinic that offers magnetic resonance therapy, or MERT, for autistic people aged 3 or older. MERT is a transcranial magnetic stimulation protocol that utilizes an EEG diagnostic to deliver personalized magnetic pulses to stimulate the brain and build neural pathways effective in managing autistic symptoms.
So now we're at the part of the paper. We're talking about the part of the paper that we do. You can see our papers here in every episode and every paper where we talk about what we would do in these very real situations that we all grapple with every day. If our adult child was having a meltdown, and that happens,
Yep.
right? Meltdowns are, again, a feature of autism. We go back to the basics when they're having a meltdown. Again, what is the antecedent? What led to the behavior? Hopefully, by the time your child is an adult, you have developed a shorthand for communication in those episodes. Start with breathing and start with modeling the behavior you want your child to have. So a lot of times we know that a meltdown is just, it's all too much. So what can you strip away in that moment? Deep breath, no language, or maybe just short amount of language, maybe a short, small touch. At that point, it depends on your child. And if the meltdowns get physical, being prepared for that. Hopefully, as an adult, they have maybe a PRN, a prescription if they're prone to having meltdowns that you can give them that they can take that will help de-escalate them. It's all about de-escalating, and it's all about helping them remember what they do to calm down.
Yeah, I mean, my son, he's 24, and he still, I mean, he certainly doesn't have a meltdown like he did way back when. But again, it's like, it's the function. Now he can communicate. Like, we were just on a Zoom call not long ago, and we were talking about something, and he was able to communicate. He's like, we were talking about something that, was starting to get him upset, and he's like, okay, I'm feeling a little nauseous, and I need a break.
Right.
And he went off and took a break, and then we started our conversation again later. And so now he's really able to communicate that.
Right.
Whereas before, it would have just escalated because he wouldn't have been able to verbalize that
100%.
Or even understand what was happening.
Yeah. So with my son, the post-mortem discussion has something that's fairly recent. We had a fairly recent burst in his language, which is awesome, but it has allowed for a lot more communication, which has really helped, and I'm not doing as much guessing. So it's really important to get in there post-mortem. And what was the trigger?
Yeah, what was the trigger?
What did you see? And, we have learned a lot about group activities. And, one thing is he's a great bowler. He loves to go bowling, but he doesn't necessarily want to bowl with a group. He wants to bowl.
He wants to bowl.
And get out of there.
Yeah.
And so we don't do group bowling anymore. If he wants to go bowling, he goes on his own. And when he's done, he leaves. And that's great information that has stopped some of the meltdowns that we were having at the bowling alley.
Absolutely. And often it is sort of like the solution is to remove yourself from whatever it is that might trigger that meltdown, or ultimately communicate like that's upsetting, and like let's figure it out. But or they develop those same coping skills that we were talking about.
Yeah, he knew exactly that he did not want to be
vent or remove yourself.
Right.
Removing myself is always a good thing. Everyone around me would agree.
I would agree. All right. What about if they're in school and they're having meltdowns in school? What do you suggest?
Okay, so it's really common that kids will keep it together in school and then meltdown at home. That can be a function of masking. It could be a function of, there's a routine and there's those expectations, and then they come home and then it's a safe place where they can let down. And so that is not uncommon. So it's really important to determine what might have changed. If they were holding it together at school and then all of a sudden having meltdowns at school, where it used to be a very calm place. Usually there's something that's changed there. So it's really important to find out. Talk to the teacher. Is there a new kid in the class? Have they rearranged the schedule? Is the yard duty situation different? Anything that might explain what might have occurred to cause that meltdown. So meltdowns are usually caused by a lack of flexibility and unclear expectations. Have those expectations changed and the child really wasn't adapting to it, or it was unclear about that? So really, do some detective work and figure out what that trigger was. It always goes back to what is the trigger.
And you talked about flexibility in autism, is something
Huge.
you cannot put enough
Huge.
information at. You cannot put enough study at, because these are people who are by definition very inflexible, and their routine, the slightest bit of their routine that you didn't even notice, maybe,
Right.
it wears at
maybe
them.
they changed desks.
Yeah.
Maybe they rearranged the desks.
Maybe the blue pen is dried out.
Yeah.
These are things that the more information that they can articulate, the better the accommodation.
Absolutely.
So here we are at the to-dos list. I love a list. You love a list.
I love a
So
list.
we put lists in the papers, things that you can do in the immediate, things that you can do in the short term, long term, and things that are blocked, meaning don't do this, right? So in the immediate, when your child is having a tantrum or a meltdown or a panic attack, you can start with your reaction.
Okay.
Calm, non-reactive, nothing more important than the way you control yourself. That will your child will find your center. Breathing, squeezy balls, whatever you are developing as a positive coping mechanism, reach for those in that moment.
And I think that's good. I know your daughter has said that she really absorbed your reaction to the meltdowns and tantrums that her brother was having.
Yes.
So it's good for everybody, siblings included,
Husbands.
to like model that behavior.
Yes.
That if you're kind of calm, cool, and collected during those meltdowns, everyone sort of benefits from that.
And it takes practice. You're not going to do it 100% of the time. Don't get down on yourself if you just couldn't do it and you had a reaction yourself. You had your own.
Thank you.
Yeah, you had your own meltdown over the tantrum.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens, right? But the more you practice, fortunately, hopefully, the better that you get at it. And again, the value of a good therapist or coach that you can talk to.
Yeah. Another one immediately that you could do is to, model the most positive coping mechanisms that's the most appropriate for the situation you're in. So like the breathing, squeeze a ball, a phrase, quiet your body, all of those things.
And I'm just going to say this because it happens. Sometimes you're in Target. And
it's always Target.
It is always
I know.
Target. I know the same reaction.
Trust me,
to
I'm
Target.
very afraid that my Target has footage of some really poorly handled meltdowns.
Target, if you're listening, we need a separate sensory room.
Delete that footage.
Give us a sensory room. Hello. But sometimes you got to call it. Right. So sometimes, and in the paper, I think we go a little bit more into safe restraint in one of one of the papers.
Yes,
that might have to happen.
Well, the number one thing is everyone needs to be safe.
Safe. Yes.
So, fortunately, a lot of the tantrums or meltdowns. Sorry, I got to use the correct phrasing. We're having at home. There was a period of time where it required restraint and safety first, for sure, for him, for his brother, for myself. Yes. My husband and I learned how to safely restrain him, and we got it down to a science.
Yes. It's in the to-dos, and again, it's in the paper. But I just wanted to mention it. If you're at Target and you feel like this is not going to end, you might have to pick them up and move them to the car and
right.
The cart might have to stay there. It'll be fine.
I do want to mention the restraint, because I remember I had never in my life thought that I'd have to learn how to restrain my child.
Yeah.
And it is something that as a parent, you're just thinking like, wow, this is kind of next level. And it was almost embarrassing to me at the beginning to realize like I had to restrain my child because he was so out of control. Like I felt like, it was my responsibility that he, got this far.
Yeah.
And that now I was having to restrain him, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. And these meltdowns could last. And I do want people to know that it is not unusual. And actually, it was our ABA therapist who taught us how to do a safe restraint hold. And it required me like basically wrapping my body around his.
Well, and it's that's a compression that actually gives him some reassurance. He's hearing your heartbeat. He's hearing your breathing. And it does have the effect of de-escalating him. Maybe not at the beginning, but eventually if you stick with it. And we're not saying that safe restraint is also you're not punishing him.
Absolutely
you
not.
are there. It's a physical thing of knowing that you're there.
It is not punitive in the least. It is really, really empathetic.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Like I felt like, we both needed to kind of, be in that hold.
Yeah.
And
I remember with my son, he used to
I wanted to try to through osmosis, calm him.
Just a cocoon. Yeah. I remember my son used to like to wrap in a blanket, and that turned out to be really a meltdown lifesaver, is that blanket. It wasn't a weighted blanket. You hear a lot about weighted blankets, but he didn't particularly care for the weighted blankets. But he did like to be tightly wound into a blanket, and, it ended up being a lifesaver that we learned about. So pay attention to all of these things. And again, safe restraint in the paper. Long-term to-do list, copious notes, and compare what changed, ask questions of people that were around. My daughter used to give the best feedback. She would say things I wouldn't see, and it would lead to conversations that I could have with her post-mortem about how it made her feel. It was important. With it comes a shorthand for communication that you can all use in those high-stress moments.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the things we would never recommend would be, do not punish your child in the moment of crisis.
Absolutely not.
This will only create more maladaptive behavior in the future. Even if those new behaviors are more convenient for you, there is no shortcut in this developmental phase. You do not punish a meltdown.
No.
They are already they're already feeling horrible. They don't like that. It's unlike a tantrum, they're not just trying to get a cookie when they're in a meltdown mode. Right. There's no, so if if you punish them in that phase, it's just piling on at that point. More often than not, when we would do our postmortem over a tantrum or a meltdown, it was clear they're just as distressed by it.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're not happy about that tantrum. It's not a win.
Right. And even with the tantrum, they want it, they can't have it. They want that cookie, they can't have that cookie. You can hold your ground if there's a legitimate reason, or they want two things and they can only have one. You can hold your ground while still showing empathy and letting your child express his frustration. Yeah, sometimes it's terrible. It's a bummer, and get it all out. Let's see what happens. Let's remind ourselves that when we do get cookies, that the cookie might be on Saturday or whatever, or maybe you end up giving a half a cookie.
Right.
I mean, I used to kind of know that if I had two cookies, he was going to want two cookies. So I could cut him down to one cookie by having two cookies, right? Because that was negotiation we have. But the negotiation doesn't make you a weak parent. It reinforces communication. Right. And then being able to speak their needs.
And sometimes a punishment could look like just staying somewhere too long. Like at Sunday Mass, staying was sort of a punishment for all of us.
Right.
It's if your child needs to remove themselves, or you need to remove your child from the situation, that's not necessarily giving in to them. It's good for everybody to say, okay, you know what, this isn't working for anyone. This is just too much.
Right.
So we're leaving. And we didn't talk about it earlier, but when we were talking about the differences between, tantrums and meltdowns, we talk about negotiation. Sometimes you can, a tantrum can be negotiate. There's a negotiation involved.
Absolutely.
But like I knew when my son was in a tantrum and there was like a reasonable negotiation going on, like, okay, well, if you do this, then we will do this.
Right.
But when he was in a meltdown, the negotiations were something like, I will do this for $1 million, instead of like a Pokemon card or something. It's like, okay, we're not in negotiation, but this is not a realistic negotiation.
Yeah, you're like writing a piece of paper. Here's $1 million.
Right, exactly. It's like it would start to get so unreasonable. It was clearly not a tantrum at that point.
And then another thing, this is probably the most important thing to block, is what people think of your child. Right?
What they think of your parenting. Them yes, I know.
You should apologize for disturbances. If they damage property, of course you should pay for that. And to the extent you can, set realistic boundaries. You don't owe anybody an explanation for your child. So you block that and put all that energy into your child and your family.
Agreed.
So why is this conversation important? We really wanted to do this episode because tantrums, meltdowns, panic attacks are part of the human experience. They are especially acute for people who have autism, and we want everybody to be armed with the best information to negotiate and live through these maladaptive behaviors.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Refrigerator Moms. We have a free download that includes a full list of practical to-dos we shared in the episode on our website. The paper includes additional what would we do's and background information on everything we talked about today. Find it on our website, refrigeratormoms.com. We'd also love to hear your questions. Send them in along with future podcast topics by connecting with us on your favorite social media. Thanks for listening. Please note that the information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The opinions and views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests. Any recommendations or suggestions made are based on personal experiences and beliefs and should not be taken as definitive advice. It's important to consult with appropriate professionals for personalized guidance. A full list of citations and sources for this episode can be found in our refrigerator paper available on our website.